The ice dance event at this year's Four Continents was perhaps the most anticipated because, well, quite frankly, we'll probably see at least one rematch among the medalists come Worlds. So let's take a closer look. As expected, the medals in Colorado Springs came down to 4 teams, 4 of the top 5 teams in the world, to be specific, and really 2 different rivalries that we've seen go back and forth all season long. So let's break those 2 rivalries down, starting with the battle for the bronze. We knew this battle was going to be interesting for several reasons. Caitlin and Andrew tend to not get internationally the same scores that they do on a national level, and I'll say it now and I'm sure I'll say it again later, the scoring at Four Continents was a little strange, particularly in the ice dance event. Mostly regarding levels. I mean, when you perform the same element all season long and it gets level 4s throughout the Grand Prix series, and then all of a sudden you're only getting a level 3, it kind of makes you wonder what features you didn't hit that you've been hitting all season long, or why that element was called differently. So the scoring was a little bit strange, and I think all of the skaters, based on their reactions in the Kiss and Cry, were a little frustrated at times by the way that their programs were scored, but all of them said, that's not really something you can control. All you can do is go out and skate your program the best way that you know how to skate it, and leave the rest up to the judges, as frustrating as that can be. Now, between these 2 teams, throughout the season, it's kind of gone back and forth, and it seemed that the Shibutanis had a bit of an edge, despite struggling with their short dance. Now, of course, before Nationals, they went back and retooled that short dance, and it's 10 times better. It shows off their personality, it shows off their skills, it shows off their speed and quickness and agility, all of the things that make them such a strong team. Caitlin and Andrew, on the other hand, have had a very strong short dance all season long, and, she really works the over-the-top animal print costume in that short dance, but they're fierce and they're fun and it's a party, and it's something that's been a comfort zone for them really this season, which is so different from seasons in the past. When it came down to the free dance, it was interesting because there's a lot of talk about Caitlin and Andrew's free dance, which I love. I think it's brilliant for them, and I think it's carried them such a long ways from where they were last year, both technically and emotionally, which makes them more relatable, it makes them more interesting, and it gives them more depth as skaters and as athletes, and it just elevates their whole performance to another level. Here, they skated with so much passion and so much intensity. Her hair was even falling out of the ponytail at the end, and that's when you know they left it all on the ice. They didn't hold anything back, and I can enjoy that so much more than perhaps a better choreographed program that's not skated all out. So my hat is off to them for the way that they continue to elevate their skating using a program that has really become a signature piece for them. Maya and Alex have a brilliant free dance as well. Again, in a totally different direction than Caitlin and Andrew. After the fact, we learned that Alex was skating with a viral infection. Now, of course, the altitude played into a lot of the results that we saw at Four Continents, and it was something that was quite a struggle for many skaters. Alex didn't really show that at all, neither did Maya. I mean, they barreled through their free dance with speed and aggression just the way that they normally do. Going back and looking at it afterwards, you can see in his face that Alex is struggling throughout, and I think there were some little bobbles, little things here and there that perhaps resulted in the low scores that they got. I hope they're not disappointed by it. I hope they're not disappointed by not medaling at Four Continents, coming off of a medal at Worlds last year, because they're kind of in a stage where, and I said before the event, I felt like Caitlin and Andrew would pull off this medal here, but give Maya and Alex the time between now and Worlds to really fine-tune that short dance and maybe make some adjustments in their free dance. And they're going to be right up there again as well. It's still going to be neck and neck. I don't think this gives the Canadian team an advantage at Worlds necessarily, only in their confidence that they know they can medal on the international level. But what a great competition between these two, and I hope that we see them competing against each other for years to come. As any elite athlete in any sport knows, going through an entire season undefeated is a milestone in and of itself. To do it twice, almost unheard of in many respects. That's what Merrill Davis and Charlie White had on the line. Now, obviously, that's not their goal overall, to go undefeated for 2 seasons in a row. That's not what they're working towards. They're working towards a second world title, and we all know that. But you have to think that that kind of plays into the rivalry a little bit with Tessa and Scott. Of course they're training mates. Of course they see each other's programs all the time. They have the same coaches. They have the same friends, all of those things. So they're always compared to each other in every situation. I will be honest and say that I felt like Merrill and Charlie would continue their streak in Colorado Springs. I didn't think that Tessa and Scott showed a lot of improvement at Canadian Nationals, but they had just changed some things in their programs, and that was wise of them. They had some things that they weren't quite getting the levels on, the scores that they wanted, and they were able to change those and incorporate them well, brilliantly in fact, in Colorado Springs. Again, there were some issues with level calls on twizzles in the short dance, on spins and lifts in the free dance, and it kind of caused some controversy. I will say this, my confusion and my frustration with the scores has nothing to do with a Canadian team versus an American team. It has nothing to do with who the scores were poorly reflected on. My frustration was with the judging. My frustration was with the fact that an element can be performed the same way all season long and be given a level 4, and then in one event, the technical caller, who's supposed to have very specific guidelines as to what makes the level differences, will suddenly call that same element a level 3. That was frustrating to me as a fan and as someone involved in the sport, and I can only imagine how frustrating it was to the skaters who put the work in, and they're in the rink hour after hour, day after day, perfecting all of those little features that give you a higher level, only to not be rewarded with that level. So I think that was a frustration for both of the top 2 teams because they weren't really sure how to gauge the scores that they were given. In the free dance, both teams performed brilliantly. We'll start there. I think Merrill Davis and Charlie White's program better showcases their skills. I think Tessa and Scott's program showcases their personality. But I don't think it highlights the overall quality of their skating the way that Merrill and Charlie's waltz does. We'll get to the scores in just a minute, but the fact is, it came down to those levels. Merrill and Charlie have struggled with levels on the footwork all season long. I don't understand why that's significant to them because they're such talented skaters. I don't know why they can't incorporate a couple more steps, a couple more turns, and get all the features that they need in order to make those footwork sequences level 4s. But there were levels on the spins, there were levels on the lifts, there were all sorts of things that were called differently here, all sorts of things that if they make those adjustments in time for Worlds, again, it's going to be a neck-and-neck battle. This was much wider spread in the point totals than I expected it to be. Tessa and Scott certainly performed brilliantly and deserved their win here, but it could be a motivating factor for Merrill and Charlie to overcome those loss of points on the levels and regain their top spot in the world. Either way, we know it's going to be a battle, that's for certain. Well, how about those scores? Well, I'm glad you asked. Now, with Tessa and Scott's free dance and Merrill and Charlie's free dance, I broke down the scores element by element to compare side by side who got the higher scores. And it's interesting to note that the base value difference between the 2 teams was in favor of Tessa and Scott by 3.5 points. Now, that doesn't sound like a ton, but when you add grade of execution to that, it turns into a dramatic number. And that base value mark is all based on those levels. Merrill and Charlie got level 3s on both of their step sequences, level 3s on their twizzles, and on their spin. Those 4 elements cost them dearly in that base value mark, and then they were not able to add the grade of execution mark to the higher base value. And that's the way that this whole system works. So while Meryl and Charlie skated all out, they left it all on the ice, the announcers were shocked when they saw the scores come up and even said, well, in my eyes, that looked like a great performance. Well, it did. It was a great performance, but it didn't start at the same base level as far as the scoring is concerned that Tessa and Scott did. Now, in the program component marks, which is something that a lot of people have talked about comparing these two teams, the difference in one mark over the other was no more than 0.08. And that advantage went in favor of the American team in the skating skills department. But that was the highest difference, the highest margin of difference between any of the program component scores. That's almost a dead heat. It's a lock in those specific areas. So at Worlds, it's all going to come down to that technical content. In grade of execution, Tessa Virtue and Scott Moir had a 0.56 advantage. What does that tell you? It tells you that Meryl and Charlie have got to get the levels up to par if they want to compete on that same plane with Tessa and Scott. Tessa and Scott had one level 3 element, and it was also a step sequence. So I'm not saying that it's not difficult to get a level 4 step sequence. It has to be difficult, or there's no point in making it the highest level you can attain. But Meryl and Charlie are capable of it, as are Tessa and Scott, and they're both going to be pressing toward that mark. Just to give you an idea, and I can post this spreadsheet that I've created to do my little nerdy comparison, but in the diagonal step sequence that was a level 4 for Tessa Virtue and Scott Moir, they got a total of 10 points, 8 for the base value and 2 for the grade of execution. For the midline sequence for Meryl and Charlie, that was a level 3, they got a total of 8.5, 6.5 for the base value and 2 points for the grade of execution. The grade of execution is identical, but that 2.5 point difference in the base value is almost the total difference in the base value overall. So you keep adding those little adjustments in the base value score, and then add in the fact that, for example, Tessa and Scott got a perfect 3 on grade of execution on their final combination lift. So well deserved. That lift is brilliantly put together and choreographed and done at such a high level. But that's where those point differences come from. I know it's confusing sometimes when you see two programs skated and you feel like one may have been skated at a higher level, but it's not scored the same way. You gotta go back to those levels every time, and more often than not, that's where the difference is going to be found, such is the case here. It sets things up very well for a World Championship showdown. Both teams have stood on top of the podium. Both teams have bested the other on more than one occasion, and you know that Tessa and Scott are hungry to get that title back. But don't be fooled by Meryl and Charlie. They want that title in their possession as well. They were thrilled to be the first Americans to win it last year, and when I spoke to them in the off-season, their goal was certainly to continue to build on that. Not to plateau at that level, but to continue to build. And to do that, they're going to have to make those adjustments to match level to level with Tessa and Scott. If they can do that, we may see a world champion determined by tenths of a point. That's how close these two teams are. Speaking of worlds, there's a good chance that we won't see too much of a shakeup among the top 4 at 4 continents once we get to Worlds in Nice. However, you have to factor in the French team of Nathalie Pécholat and Fabien Borza, because for years now they have been right on the edge of breaking into that top tier, and while they aren't there yet, they're certainly right there in the mix with Caitlin and Andrew, the Shibutanis, even throw in Bobrova and Soloviev from Russia, who have competed well this season. Those skaters there are going to be in the mix, likely for that bronze medal, because of course we're expecting the battle for gold and silver to be determined between Tessa and Scott and Meryl and Charlie. Don't forget Nathalie Pécholat and Fabien Borza, though. They have some very strong, unique elements as well, and while I don't know that their programs this year suit them as much as their programs last year did, their technical content is always very difficult and always very complex, which helps them to score well on the international scene. Regardless of where they factor into the mix, what we saw at 4 Continents was a great preview of the fireworks we're sure to see come the World Championships.